As much as I loved my experience living in China, the truth is that China also made me pretty miserable. And this is not an easy video for me to make, so please be patient, hear me out before you leave a mean comment. It's an important video for me to make because I feel like sharing this part of my story with you is just simply necessary. I really don't want anyone who's watching my videos or anyone who will choose to read my book to feel like there are parts of the story that I intentionally kept away from you. That's why I decided to make this video and really go in depth and tell you about how freaking difficult it was for me to adapt to life in China and how freaking miserable I was in the beginning. And I know that miserable is a strong word, but honestly, this is how I felt. And thanks to the fact that I was keeping a diary, I was keeping a journal and writing everything down, thanks to that, now I'm able to look back at it and really see how I felt at that moment. And I think me telling you the whole truth about my experience can be very helpful for those of you who decide to move to China. Another reason why I decided to make this video is, as you know, I've recently published my book about my experience living in China. And big part of my book, especially the beginning of the book, is dedicated to the first couple of weeks, couple of months of my stay in China. And a lot of the things that I talk about in the beginning of my book are quite negative. I talk a lot about how lonely I felt. I talk a lot about how much I disliked China in the beginning, how confused I felt, how I felt that it was not the right place for me, how scared I was. I was like literally terrified for my life sometimes. I honestly thought that I made a big mistake moving to Shanghai. And this whole process that I went through, moving to China and not being happy about my decision and regretting my decision, and then the whole journey of me getting used to everything and eventually having the time of my life. I also want to say that it's not like a hater video where I'm gonna hate on China. No, absolutely not. This is an honest video, because the thing is, no matter how much you enjoy your experience moving abroad is never easy, especially if you move to a country that is so drastically different to where you come from. And I think if there's anyone out there reading my book or watching my videos and wants to make such a drastic decision to leave their life behind and move to the other side of the planet and start a new life, they deserve to know the whole freaking truth. My very first interaction with a Chinese person just after landing in China was a pretty negative one. And the reason why I want to tell you that story is because shit like that will happen. When you're moving to a new country where you're going through this whole process and you're just doing all the administration stuff and you're getting around and you don't know the language and you don't know the customs and you don't know what to do, small things can happen to you that will eventually really influence your experience. So what happened to me is right after we landed in Shanghai, we decided to take the maglev train. So we took the train. If you don't know, maglev is this very fast train that goes from the airport in Shanghai to the city center, or actually not really city center, kinda-ish. The problem is that it doesn't go all the way to downtown Shanghai where we were staying. So after taking the maglev train, we needed to take a taxi to our hotel. We still had like a 15-20 minute drive to our hotel. So we take a taxi, my mom and I, we shared one. And basically what happened is that the taxi driver tried to cheat us. But the way he did it, it was really not nice, borderline aggressive. So what he did was basically when we arrived at our hotel, he didn't stop at the entrance. He stopped sort of ish like 100 meters from the hotel in the middle of a very busy street that had like 4 lanes or something. And he literally stopped in the freaking middle of it. And he told us to get out and pay like 600 kwai. 600 kwai was like almost $100 or something, and we knew that this was not what we owed him for like a 20 or 50 minute drive. But another problem was not even the fact that he demanded so much money from us, it was also the fact that he stopped in the middle of this freaking busy street. And if you know Shanghai, like traffic in Shanghai can be really bad. People drive really fast, so getting out in the middle of a street is just a very stupid idea. You shouldn't do it. Plus, we had a lot of luggage. So we knew that like it would be freaking impossible for us to get out in this place. So we started asking him to drive to our hotel, to the entrance where there was space for taxis to pull up. Obviously, he didn't want to do it because he wanted more money from us. So what happened was that we sort of started talking to each other. I mean, he was speaking Chinese to us. We didn't understand anything. We were speaking English to him. I guess he didn't understand anything. And at some point, he really got angry at us and started getting aggressive. And I just want to say that this is the first and only time this happened to me in China, that someone behaved like this towards me. It never happened again. Yeah, I just want to put it out there. This behavior was definitely not normal. It's definitely not something that happens frequently. Taxis in Shanghai are a very safe way of transportation. It's okay to take taxis at night as a woman. I did that myself many times. My friends do that and nothing ever happened again. But I guess we were very unlucky on that very first day that this happened to us. So the dude starts getting angry. His face is like turning red. He's like screaming at us. He's like waving his hands in our direction. And then all of a sudden he turns around and he speeds up and drives away in the opposite direction of our hotel. And in that moment, like both my mom and I, we just like went quiet and we were like, oh my God, are we getting kidnapped now? What do? We cannot open the door and just like escape. We were like literally speeding away from our hotel. And then eventually he turned around and drove us to our hotel. And I know you might be thinking, oh, so what? Nothing bad happened to you. But well, that was like my very first interaction with a Chinese person right after arriving in China. And that really influenced my mood. It really scared me. I didn't know if that was like normal in China. From that day, I was like really scared of taking taxis for months. I swear to God, for months, I wouldn't dare to take a taxi alone in Shanghai because I was like still afraid that this would happen to me. Over the course of next couple of days, things became worse and worse. After a couple of days in China, I realized that this was all a huge mistake and that China was not for me. It's kind of funny to look at this now from the perspective of someone who knows what will happen eventually and be like, you know, silly you didn't know that you will have a time of my life, your life, but you know. Okay, so let me explain to you why I really didn't like China, didn't like my experience living in China from the very beginning. The thing about moving to any foreign country, as I said in the beginning, is difficult. And moving to a country that is so different to where I grew up in Poland and Denmark. Moving to China for me was like moving to a different world. I was young. I didn't know the language. I didn't know anything about China. And to be honest, yes, knowing the language would help a lot because communication issues were very much real and they were very much a struggle for me in the beginning. However, I think that even if you know the language, even if you were older than I was back then, you'll probably still struggle in the beginning. Everyone that I know that moved to China struggled in the beginning. This is something I actually kind of even like make fun of in my book, that like all expats that live in China, when you talk to them, when they tell you about, you know, their move, their first, you know, couple of years, sometimes even living in China, they're all like, you know, in the beginning, I hated it, but now I freaking love it. And I cannot imagine living anywhere else. A lot of things in China work very differently to the way they work in Denmark or in Poland. There were a lot of things that I needed to get used to, and it took me quite some time. And I really want to emphasize that this process of me, you know, really feeling miserable in the beginning and then eventually enjoying my experience and loving my life in China, it was quite long and it was quite difficult. And I spent many nights like lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking, what the F have I done? Like, why did I think that coming to China was a good idea? There were a lot of things that bothered me in China in the very beginning. The amount of people, traffic, crowds. Coming from Copenhagen, which is a city of like 1 million people, to Shanghai, where the population is like 25 million people, was a huge change and a huge adjustment. And for a majority of people, doesn't matter where you come from, even if you come from a big city in the West, adjusting to living in a big trainee city can be quite challenging. I was so not used to that amount of people everywhere. I was so not used to that crazy traffic, and you know, whenever I took metro, I would get lost because like every station in Shanghai has at least like a couple of different exits, and some have like, I think People's Square Station has like 16 or 19 exits at this point, you know, and it's like, it's really important to figure out which one you're supposed to take, because you might take a wrong one and just like you end up walking for half an hour. And in Copenhagen, if you walk for half an hour, you are basically at the other end of the city. So getting used to the size and the the fact that Shanghai was a very intense city really took me a while. You know, the constant noises that this city makes. Shanghai is a very loud city, and also Chinese people can be quite loud sometimes. I feel like it's more acceptable in China to be loud, especially for older people, but maybe that's the thing everywhere, right? Like older people maybe they don't hear that well and they like yell to each other. That happens a lot in China. Yeah, I mean, it happened to me several times that I would see people and I'm like, are they yelling at each other? But no, they're just like talking. But sometimes when people speak Mandarin to each other, it kind of sounds like they're yelling at each other. Another thing was communication issues. Obviously, if you move somewhere new, you'll need to do a whole lot of like administration stuff. You need to go to different places to like, you know, purchase different shit, like, I don't know, detergent. I remember in the beginning, I went to this like local shop and I had issue like finding the right laundry detergent because, well, obviously in China, everything is written in Chinese and I couldn't read in Chinese, which from a perspective of time, I see that this is, you know, this is my own fault. I was in their country, I was the guest in this country, and it was my responsibility to learn to read Chinese, to understand what's going on. I'm fully aware of that. However, of course, when it happens to you, when you're in the moment and you're just freaking, you know, trying to buy some laundry detergent and you cannot read what it says on the package, and it's like yet another issue you're experiencing, like your 115th issue of the day, you're gonna get upset. Another thing that would happen to me, like I would say quite frequently in China, especially in the beginning when my Chinese was still very bad, whenever I would ask someone for help, like a shop assistant, and obviously like, depends where you are in Shanghai, but where I lived, it wasn't like very central. So people in that area like definitely didn't speak English. So I would, you know, try to use translator, I would try to use dictionaries and try to speak Chinese, but it would still happen quite often that people just sort of almost refused to listen to me or didn't want to engage with me, didn't want to help me because they're scared of the fact that I was a foreigner, or like they, you know, didn't want to deal with a foreigner. That can happen in China sometimes. Some people are just like, I would say almost intimidated by the fact that you're a foreigner and you're speaking a foreign language, and maybe you're even trying to say something in Chinese, but you're saying it completely wrong, so they don't understand what you're saying, and they just rather, you know, exit the situation and like run away from you. That happened to me quite a few times. Like, you know, in my book, I kind of laughed at like, I was used to the fact that people were treating me as if I was a ghost because, you know, sometimes people would just like run away from me. Another thing that I struggled a lot with in the beginning was food. And I know that now when I think about it, I'm like, what the fuck, Kaja, how could you struggle with food? Chinese food is like the best. And now after years of living in Asia, also in different Asian countries, well, actually, I only lived in Thailand besides China, but traveling all over Asia, I freaking love Asian food. I eat it a lot. But back then, I wasn't as used to Chinese food as I am now. And also Chinese food in Europe is very different than Chinese food in China. So I remember after like a couple of days of, you know, being excited about eating all these like new exciting dishes, I got to the point where I was like, okay, I've done that now I want to go back to eating bread. I know it sounds lame because it's just food, but food is something that, you know, we put in our bodies multiple times a day, and it's our fuel and it's what gives us energy. And food was actually a big struggle for me in the beginning, because as much as I like Chinese food, I also just craved a lot of the things that I was used to eating since I was, you know, born. I know that nowadays in Shanghai there are a lot of foreign supermarkets, so certain things are more and more available, but that also depends on which part of the city you live. If you live in like French concession or like in downtown, like yeah, sure, you can get everything. But where I lived, like there were no foreign stores. Like I had to go to Walmart or Tesco to get some like foreign products, but they were also very expensive. And finally, probably the most important thing that I didn't mention is that I felt very lonely. It took me quite some time to find friends in China and to meet the right people. And in the very beginning, I did meet quite a few people that I realized were not the right people for me, that were interested in stuff that I wasn't interested in. And that's something that I really wanted to talk about in my book, because I think it can be helpful for people to hear that, like, if you're feeling lonely, if you're starting university, or if you're moving somewhere new, and you feel like you're alone and you cannot find the right people, like you're meeting all these people but they're not right for you, I feel like it can be helpful to know that you're not alone. And I guess majority of people experience this. I had to get used to the fact that the way I look made me stand out. That's not something I've experienced before. As I said, I've only lived in Poland and Denmark before moving to China, so that was not something I was used to. I was used to being able to just, you know, blend in the crowd and like not being different from the crowd. And all of a sudden in China, I was the foreigner, I was the different one. And in Shanghai, there are a lot of foreigners, so in general, people are used to it, but it still does happen that people look at you. It still happens that someone will maybe ask you for a picture, or children will like point fingers at you. And to be honest, I feel like it's maybe like almost a psychological issue. Because in general, people in China are quite nice towards foreigners and they're quite interested. So it's also not like anything bad or unpleasant ever happened to me because I look different or I was a foreigner. But maybe it was just more like, you know, psychological, that knowing that you're different makes you feel like, oh, I don't belong here. I am not one of you. This is not my place. So yeah, those are just some thoughts that I remember I had in the beginning. I found that quite intimidating sometimes, that I would go places and people would treat me differently because I was a foreigner. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to hear more about my experience living in China, check out my book, I Lived in Shanghai. As I said, it's available on Amazon, both as an ebook and paperback. And yeah, I hopefully see you soon.